Want to push record? Well, welcome everyone. We've just been sitting here chatting and excited to be here as Anthropology and Praxis. I know that I can speak on behalf of the rest of the conveners that we are thrilled. This is a long time coming. We had Bernie help support us through a development of this group and some ideas that we had brought to the table about anthropology and praxis. We officially launched at Casca in May. We had a follow-up session in June. Some of you were on that call, which we had an incredible breakout discussions at that session as well. And this is the first of a bi-monthly virtual meetup. And we have plans all the way, I think, all until almost March. So we'll talk about what's coming up in November at the end. But today we have Bernie here, who is past president of Casca, and we're going to be talking about reconciliation. So before we get started, I just thought that we would just welcome you and let you know who the conveners are. So I'm Natalie Myers, and I'm in Calgary. And I live and work mostly in Calgary, and I'm located on traditional territory of Treaty 7. And I'm an organizational and design anthropologist working outside of the academy. And I am going to call on my colleagues here, and then the last one will be you, Bernie, because we'll segue into the topic discussion. So, how about you, Cora?
Hi, everyone. I'm Cora Wood. I come to you from Calgary, also living and working in Treaty 7 and Treaty 8, and working in sustainability and energy. And so happy to see the kickoff, the official kickoff of Anthropology and Praxis. And I think that's all from me. Craig, are you still here?
Oh,
I lost your
Yep.
face. Okay,
I
great.
am here.
I will mute. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. My name is Craig Candler. I'm based in Victoria, BC, on Lekwungen territory. Um, I'm the director and founder of something called Reciprocity Research, and there's a couple of other branches of reciprocity as well. But I've worked for the last close to 35 years, I think, with Indigenous communities across Western Canada mostly, Alberta and BC primarily, and I'm still doing it and love the work that I'm privileged to be able to do.
Thanks, Craig. How about you, Gemma?
Hi, I'm Gemma, and I'm also based on Lekwungen territories and working with Reciprocity with Craig. And I am supporting the conveners by hosting the slides today, and very, very excited to hear everybody speaking on our panel. So thank you all.
Thanks, Gemma. And Kai, who's not here, he's in the back in the UK. He's one of our founders of AP and a convener as well. He may or may not join us. Time difference and what he's up to there right now might hold him back. He did his PhD research here in Alberta and in politics. I'll leave it at that. But he's a PhD student at LSE. So we miss him. He flew back in August, but he's going to still remain a partner to us. So, Bernie, I will let you do your introduction and then lead us from there and then into Craig and the rest of the panel today. Thanks, everyone.
Kwe sira wen Louiso Bernie Perley will stugwi naga Wabanaki O'Neill. Uh, my name is Bernie Perley, and I come from Tobic First Nation in New Brunswick. That is Wabanaki territory. We are the people of the Dawn. And for me, one of the things that I'm excited about is, from the perspective of, the Wabanaki, we make the world anew with every new day. And I think that with the um, anthropology and praxis, we're seeing this, being played out in a very significant way. And I'm really excited about how we can move forward with kind of work that we're all doing. I'm joining you from the traditional ancestral and unceded territories of the Hunkaminam speaking Musqueam people. And so I'm on the UBC campus, and this is a place where, they are taking very important steps at reconciliation by, putting up bilingual signs in Hunkaminam as well as in English. They're also introducing Musqueam artwork in a lot of the public spaces. and there's an engagement with Musqueam on programming for students, faculty, and staff here at UBC. So I know that these are kinds of important issues, but also important strategies for addressing the terms of reconciliation. And I'm excited to see how we can move forward as anthropologists, whether we're in the academy or outside the academy, on imagining ways that reconciliation becomes meaningful, reciprocal, and respectful. So I'll hand it over to the conveners.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bernie. Um, I'm gonna maybe actually just hand it right over to some of the my co-panelists here, Natasha and Gretchen. If you can maybe just say a few words about yourself, introduce yourself, and then we've got a few questions that the panels are going to be guided by. Uh, I don't know if we can move to the next slide there, Gemma. Great. And so the first one is really kind of an introductory one. So introduce yourself. Where are you coming from? Where's your position? Who do you work for? And the kind of work that you do with Indigenous communities. I think that's probably a great way to start. Gretchen, do you want to start the intros?
Sure. Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. It's so nice to see some familiar faces and meet some new folks. I'm Gretchen Fox. I'm currently an anthropologist with the Heritage Program at the First Peoples Cultural Council in BC. I live in Secwepemcúlecw. That's the traditional territory of the Secwepemc Nation in Kamloops, BC, or Kamloops, BC. My training is in cultural anthropology. I did my PhD at the University of North Carolina. I finished up in 2009, but I did my research in New Brunswick with in the Mi'kmaq community of Elsipogtog. So it's nice to meet you, Bernie, and it's nice to have that kind of New Brunswick connection. I'll leave it at that. I'll talk more about what I do. I'm just really happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Wonderful. All right.
Um,
Natasha.
Kisukukit, Hugaklik Natasha. I am from BC, from the Tinaja Nation Council, or from the Tinaja Nation. I work for the Tinaja Nation Council. I've been in the field of anthropology for 10 years, I would say. And the work that I do revolves around Tinaja title and rights. But further than that, it revolves around our inherent rights and the ability to self-govern. And that's also ensuring that the work that we do at the Tinaja Nation Council comes from a Tinaja worldview, rather than a Western worldview, or at least it balances. So that's the work that I'm doing.
Great. I'll say a few more words about the work that I do as an anthropologist as well. Um, in many ways, this word reconciliation, it's a bit of an uncomfortable one. It comes to us through legal traditions and through some really difficult histories. And for me, another way of saying it is sitting down with colonialism every day. And that, as an anthropologist, as a social scientist, that's how I describe what we do. It's as much about settler colonial communities and cultures and ways of seeing the world as it is about indigenous worlds, and finding that balance, finding the connections and bridges and the places where some trouble needs to be made in order to move things forward in a way that's better for everyone involved. So I work primarily, almost exclusively with Indigenous communities. Lots of work in northern Alberta with the Athabasca and Mikisew Cree downstream of the oil sands. Lots of work with the Tanaka Nation. I've been honored to work with Natasha for much of those 10 years that she's talking about. Lots of work with the Similkameen nations, upper and lower, in the Similkameen Valley, quite a bit of work on the island, that sort of thing. And so that's kind of where I'll be coming from in terms of the communities that I work with and work directly for, and the kind of work that we do. So, Natasha or Gretchen, do you one of you want to take on a little bit more about what it's like being an anthropologist working with Indigenous communities these days?
Yeah, I'd love to. And it actually kind of leads into the second question. Um, I'm wondering if Gretchen, if you wanted to speak to it a little bit more before we move on to the second question, and then I can segue into it.
Sure, that sounds great. I can just provide a little bit more information about where the organization that I'm working for and what it's like to be an anthropologist, a white settler anthropologist working for an Indigenous-led organization that is focused on revitalizing, supporting Indigenous communities and revitalizing their culture and heritage. So the First Peoples Cultural Council was established by the province of BC about 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 1990, I guess, to administer the First Peoples Language, Heritage, and Culture Act, which is legislation in BC, and it ties into supporting truth and reconciliation very closely. So our primary work is delivering grants, providing specialized support, and that's where anthropology comes in, and also advocating for legislation and policy that aim to protect and revitalize Indigenous languages, but also cultural practices. It's really fulfilling and challenging, and there are lots of opportunities to draw on anthropological methods and tools to support community-based initiatives, whether that's things like supporting oral history interviews, supporting communities in documenting cultural practices, and advocating for legislation. And like Craig said, it's doing this work as an anthropologist, and particularly a white settler anthropologist, you're in constant conversation with colonialism and the legacy of anthropology in Indigenous communities. And so it makes sense that a lot of times the communities we work with, even as an Indigenous-led organization, are wary of hearing the word anthropologists and working with anthropologists, and that's okay. And it's good to be able to be aware of that and to know that truth. And so from where anthropology sits today, from my perspective, it's so important to focus on relationships and the responsibilities that come with those relationships. And anthropology has a lot to bring to this kind of collaborative work. And just being explicit and thoughtful about project designs and how projects that we work on center Indigenous knowledge, and that they're very respectful of protocols and intellectual property as well. So maybe that's a good segue into how do you do anthropology? That second question, Natasha.
Thank you. So yeah, for me, what is it like being an anthropologist today working for my Indigenous community? So I am Tunaxa. Both of my parents are Tunaxa. My dad is from the community of Akiskanook, and my mom is from the community of Akam. They're about an hour away from each other, close to Cranbrook and Invermere in BC. I grew up on the reserves, both of them, primarily in Akam. And as you can see, I'm white passing. I'm not full Tunaxa. Unfortunately, I don't actually know any of my white family. I have no contact with any of my white biological family. So all I know is Tunaxa, being raised Tunaxa. However, because of the color of my skin, I experienced a lot of exclusion from things because of that. And I felt like I had to overcompensate a little bit because of my skin color. I was like, I need to be like a real Tanakha. I need to be as Tanakha as I can, right? And this always brought like a cultural awareness to me, especially when I started going to school in town and with other non-Indigenous kids who looked like me, but they were not like me at all. And so it was a really interesting view um, to see the world. When I started working for the nation and I learned about the field of anthropology, it made sense to me because I'm like, oh, this is who I am. This is what I do. I'm an anthropologist at heart. That's me. For me, anthropology, what it is to me is the study of culture in time and space and where I fit, where cultures fit within a myriad of other cultures. And so for me, when I think about my culture and I look at it through time and space in relation to other cultures, in relation to Canadian society, in relation to everything, is like I'm placing myself within my culture, but then I'm also placing my culture within the greater society. It's always been so important for me to maintain um, my identity as a Tanakh person. So when working for my community, when working for the nation, it's actually really hard because I don't come at it as a job. It's not a day job to me. The work that I do, I'm a I'm a Tanakh warrior. The work that I do is I am working. It's my life work to to maintain cultural practices. When I do anthropology, I am looking at our culture through time, where we've been, where we are now, how we are unique, how the Tanakh are unique, and how we're distinct from others, so that we don't lose those things. Assimilation is such a looming threat that lies over us as a community, especially when we take on colonial systems, especially working in governance, because colonial governance systems have been imposed on us. That sometimes it feels like I'm fighting a losing battle working for my nation. And it, like I said, it's not just a job. This is my identity that's on the line, and the identity of my child and his children and all of my people, that I feel this pressure when working for my people. And so how I do anthropology is everything that I do when it comes to engagement, that I'm really listening to our people and what they're saying and what they want to see. All of the policies and the initiatives that we take with government and industry, I am ensuring that the information that we're doing is, especially with the research, when we talk to elders, when we talk to people about what's important on the land, I'm working to make sure that that doesn't sit on a shelf and not come back. When we talk about language and what certain terms mean, I'm working to make sure that we're utilizing our language and we're utilizing these terms to help our understanding. So I'm using it to, like, as cultural revitalization and also like maintaining the integrity of our culture. So what is anthropology to me? I actually don't have a degree in anthropology. I am currently in university now. I just started again. I started in 2018 and I went to school until 2020, December of 2020. But I was pregnant. So I had a baby shortly after. And I've been raising my child. And now I'm at a place where I'm going back to university and I'm sitting in my classroom and we're learning about anthropology. And it's really stark to me how colonial it is, how Western it is, and almost as a discipline, condescending in just in the sense that I, as somebody who, when I learned what anthropology was, I'm like, oh, me, I do that. But I do it from a Tanakh framework, right? From a Tanakh lens. I don't come in it from a Western lens. So coming and looking at it from a Western lens, it kind of puts itself up really high as this what you need to aspire to. Whereas me, taking everything that I've learned from anthropology in my classes and in the university, I am able to apply it through a Tanakh worldview that I come up as anthropology, like an indigenous anthropologist, a Tanakh anthropologist, and I'm able to use the methods and use the theories and see how they fit into how I view the world and how I do work as an anthropologist. And that's lovely. So that's how I do anthropology, and that's what anthropology is to me.
Wonderful. I'm gonna position myself a little bit in relationship to what Natasha's talking about here. Um, I'm born and raised in Alberta, got my PhD at UBC, worked internationally, and chose not to go the academic route because I found the places that I was happiest and that I felt I did the best work was when I was working directly for communities. And so that's sort of been the path that I've gone down. One of those communities is the Tanakh Nation, where Natasha is from. Um, and to me, I think it's I think what Natasha's talking about, what I hear when Natasha's talking about this, is there are multiple anthropologies. There is a particular tradition of anthropology that we put a capital on, that comes through a university tradition. But if we understand anthropology as understanding humans through time and space, and understanding that trajectory in a way that is culturally informed and historically informed and informed by humanity, there's many different traditions of anthropology that come together in a space of reconciliation. One of the projects, early projects, that I was honored to work on with the Tanakh Nation, um, and it was awkward. There were some, Natasha knows some of these elders. They got on the phone with me. Some of them aren't with us anymore. Um, and they basically said, Craig, we hear you've got a PhD. We appreciate some of the work you've done before. And they basically tested me out. They what they were looking for was someone who could support the Tanakh Nation in putting together some evidence, that would be going into court. A great big ski hill operation, called Jumbo, in the Jumbo Pass area, that was being proposed, going through the environmental impact assessment, and the nation was preparing to fight it. Um, the reason they were reaching out to me was because they knew that it was going to be useful to the nation to have someone who had letters after their name, and could speak to the ethnographic literature and could speak to some of these ethnohistoric documents that, anthropologist by the name of Schaefer had documented alongside Tanakh elders back in the 1930s and 40s and 50s, and going back further to Boaz and things like that. Fundamentally asking the question, Dr. Candler, and working with the lawyers and things like that, it was fundamentally a project around, is there evidence in the ethnohistoric domain that a particular, tradition of religious practice, actually goes back prior to 1846? And this is where we're sitting down with colonialism all the time. The magical date of 1846, when Canada, or pardon me, Britain and the U.S. Established a border, is taken by Canadian courts as a benchmark for Indigenous rights and title. And so these were questions. is there evidence that the nation knows absolutely there is incredible depth to this, but is there an evidentiary basis for it? And so the evidence of a social scientist, an anthropologist, was useful to the Ktunaxa Nation, and that's an example. I think we've got some slides from the Gatmuk Declaration and things like that. It's been quite an epic case. It was one of the longest projects I think ever within the BC environmental assessment system, um, and it through the declaration and through the work, the nation had particular goals, and it was, I think, in the end, became a really profound nation building experience of defending these areas. It's a place that Ktunaxa people still go back to every year for the Katmuk camp. It's really brought people together in many ways. Um, as an anthropologist, I was honored to be able to play a very small part in that, in bringing forward the ethnohistoric record in as honest and accurate a manner as I was able to, in order to inform the decisions of a court. So that's just sort of one example of the way that I do work. I end up doing a lot of work in the environmental impact assessment world, because not everything goes to court, thank goodness. But it's really, really common that nations need to sit down with the mechanisms of colony, whether it's the environmental assessment office or other arms of government, and be able to articulate their voices in ways that make sense not only to their own nation, but make sense to those colonial folks who are looking at court decisions and other kinds of stuff. And so that's a lot of the work that I get to do. So, um, Gemma, yeah, let's go back to those questions. Natasha, I think you took us through the second one. Gretchen, how about what is reconciliation to you? Where do you see the work of anthropology and truth and reconciliation going in the future? And what opportunities do you see for students, practitioners, and communities who are all a part of this ride?
Mm-hmm. It's a really interesting question, because when I think about reconciliation, I have to think about my own positionality. And I came to anthropology through a really similar trajectory to yours, Craig, it sounds like, where I did formal schooling and then made a really deliberate decision to work with communities, because that's where I derived the most enjoyment out of my work. And it's where I thought that the work could be the most meaningful and the most impactful, where I could do the most good. And so I also spent a lot of time over the years doing traditional use studies and working with communities and living in different Indigenous communities, working through the environmental assessment process. And more and more thinking about, what does reconciliation look like, and what does it look like to be, when anthropology can be in service of reconciliation. The first thing that comes to mind is I have to think about myself as a settler anthropologist with a responsibility to acknowledge and reflect on the harms of colonial anthropology on Indigenous peoples, and to listen and learn. And anthropology provides a really good opportunities to do that, that kind of deep listening and learning. And the methods are really suited. The methods of anthropology, our toolkit, if you will, is flexible, and it's really well suited to learning and changing over time. And we can use it to center Indigenous worldviews in our work, and Indigenous goals, and to take those meaningful actions that reconciliation requires to support cultural revitalization. And so for me, I guess, taking this honest view of the past and the willingness to follow the lead of Indigenous communities and Indigenous anthropologists can support these opportunities to kind of reframe who is an expert and who owns this knowledge. And that leads to necessary shifts in research design and how anthropology is done. And so it's sort of approaching the work, wondering things like, what does the community want to know? and what's the right way to ask questions, and what are the right questions to ask? Who are the knowledge holders, and how can we build capacity within the community, essentially to work ourselves out of a job eventually, as settler anthropologists. Who has a right to know this knowledge, to hear it, and who decides who it's going to be shared and used? And then ultimately, how can this, constantly asking myself and within our organization, how does this work support reconciliation in sustainable ways, not just in a sort of parachute into communities and support projects and then see you later, but really building that capacity. And it requires funding, and it's long-term work. Reconciliation is. So I think about that as as an individual anthropologist. And then I also have to think about it as someone who's, from my position, working within this Indigenous-led organization. So we work daily with the 204 First Nations across BC to put reconciliation into action. And we do that through a lot of grant programming and supporting things like language revitalization planning and training sessions and things like that. I'm not a linguist, but we have Indigenous linguists and Indigenous anthropologists who are leading that language program. But I wanted to share an example of something that the Heritage Program at First Peoples Cultural Council has been involved in, and how that kind of ties into reconciliation. And I think you have a slide of that, Gemma, of this report that was just published at the end of June, I believe. So this is a report that First Peoples Cultural Council published, and it was created through a partnership with our friends and colleagues at the Kiu Enterprise Corporation. So they're Haida researchers, anthropologists, just generally brilliant people who really are leaders in this field of repatriation in British Columbia and throughout Canada. So this report is called From Stealing to Healing, and includes a lot of anthropological research that draws on anthropological tools and lenses. So there's a research on the history of the theft and removal of ancestors and cultural belongings from Indigenous communities. It focuses on BC, but we think that there are aspects of the report that Indigenous folks throughout Canada and even internationally would find applicable and interesting to their work. There's an inventory of where many of these ancestors and belongings are held today in museums and universities. And then there are 16 case studies that are stories told from the perspective of 16 different First Nations communities and organizations. And I think there are a couple museums as well across BC about what repatriation means to them, how they went about it, and how they went about it in line with their own worldviews, and why it's such a meaningful part of reconciliation. Let's see, I could go on and on about this, but the report, it ends up, it has some advocacy as well, calling on all levels of government and Canadians to support repatriation, not just as a meaningful step in reconciliation with it, which it is, but as something that benefits all Canadians. And in the words of Nika Collison, one of the authors of the report, repatriation to her means making things right. And so that's something that I carry with me into my work as an anthropologist, is how can I draw on the skills that I learned these decades ago in school and throughout these different kind of work lives that I've led to support communities to make things right in their work. So that's what I think about when I think about anthropology and reconciliation. It's putting our skills and our tools to work in support of Indigenous-led revitalization.
Natasha, I'm the title of that, From Stealing to Healing, and this idea of anthropology is theft. is something that, and even in our prep talk for this, it came up. It's in the Tanakh context. There is a feeling of theft, even in the ethno-historic domain, not just possessions and belongings, but in the ethnographic literature. I'm wondering, Natasha, if you're able to, what do you think about this idea moving from stealing to healing? That movement from anthropology as theft to anthropology as decolonization, as something moving us to a better place.
Um, yeah, absolutely. From my perspective, as somebody who works for the nation, for the Tanakh Nation Council, the idea of it is obviously wonderful. Repatriation. Something that I think needs to be brought up, though, is that a lot of communities don't have the capacity to take their stuff back, right? And like we are working on a repository so that we have somewhere to put things, that it's not going to get ruined, like that's not going to go up in flames or flood, that is at the right temperature and the right humidity. A lot of places don't have the capacity for something like that. But I know that it's not just museums, it's like vintage stores. There's been situations within my family where a local vintage shop was holding a jacket and gloves. And my mother, who's like a Tanakh historian, she recognized it and she's like, this is this person's best. And she contacted my great uncle, who is a very highly respected elder, and he ID'd it, and we tried to get it back, and it was really hard to get that back. We wanted it back in our family, not to go to the KNC. We wanted it back in our families, and that's a different thing too, right? When we're looking at that, who was it stolen from and how is it being given back to? What is the capacity for the nation that it's being given back to? And how are we able to support them in building their capacity to be able to heal in the way that it needs to be done?
Mm-hmm. How about Natasha, can you take us to the next question? When it comes to reconciliation, what opportunities or threats do you think anthropologists working beyond the university should be paying most attention to? What kinds of questions should we be thinking about?
And so for me, this to me, Gretchen, I really loved what you said about, we want to build capacity so that, essentially we will lose our jobs, work ourselves out of a job. And when it comes to working with Indigenous communities, if like working beyond the university, if you're working with Indigenous communities, I think about Craig, who is such an inspiration to me and always has been. The first time I started working for the nation, I was transcribing interviews that Craig was doing with our elders. And I was like, I want to be doing this. And so what Craig did is he brought me on to all of the interviews that were being done. And he taught me how to do the mapping interviews. And I was transcribing them. I was mapping them. I was sitting there learning how to ask questions, learning how to do field work, the work that an anthropologist does. And he was always very clear in, I am doing this so that you will take my job. That is my goal. My goal is for you to take this job. That is something that to me is really important if with working with Indigenous communities, is to create space for capacity. Hopefully you will find people who are also interested in culture and cultural revitalization and knowledge transfer. That's a huge part of anthropology, and the work that you do is the knowledge transfer. And when I was listening to the interviews and when I was sitting in that room with them, with the elders, giving these interviews, that's what they were doing. They were handing off knowledge to me. They would have been very uncomfortable just working with specifically Craig and some non-Tanakha folks. He always made sure that there was Tanakha people in the room, and he was like, this, we want to be her job, that she's doing this. We're training her to do this work so that I don't have to be the one doing it, working himself out of a job. That is creating space for up and coming Indigenous anthropologists to be able to come into the field and to make them, to empower them to know that they can do this work and that it's actually meant for them. That's something that I think is really important when it comes to reconciliation, is creating space. When we think about it, how are you creating space in the field of anthropology for Indigenous students, for Indigenous practitioners, right? That's something that's really, and not only that, from my experience with interviews and transcribing, it's incredibly important that the transcriptions for this type of work, and that you always have somebody from that community in the room in some capacity, learning how to do what you're doing, inspiring them, empowering them, and also transcribing those interviews. Because sometimes we need those interviews transcribed, and they're being, given out to transcription companies, and they come back and it's
or AI.
and now
And it's
AI.
terrible. Yeah. So inaccurate.
And the language is butchered.
Yeah.
Terrible seeing people's names that I look up to, and elders, and I'm like, their name is so wrong, or place names and the names are so wrong. This stuff will not stand legally because it's incorrect, and it's also really hard if we're looking for legal information, working in that capacity. We're looking for information and we're typing words in and we are not finding it because it's there, but it's typed differently. So it's really important to have either somebody who is of the community that you're working with, doing the transcription work, understanding, like gaining the knowledge that comes from that, and also like being able to offer context to the work that you're doing is also really important too.
100%.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Even when there is not a language barrier, there is a cultural barrier. On almost all the work that we do, we talk about this is interview-based work, use and occupancy mapping, that sort of thing. There being three key roles in the interview room, and they all have to happen. Even if you might have two people, but all three roles have to be there. The first one is that cultural role. It's creating the context, the cultural context where knowledge holders feel like they actually want to talk. Because if you can't do that, it doesn't matter how good your social science is. It doesn't matter how good your information management is. You're not doing the first number one job. And so that community co-researcher role is so critical. I do just want to, I think there's one other thing. Natasha, thank you. It's very complimentary. I think it wasn't out of the goodness of my heart that I was told by Tanakha leadership, I was told by my bosses that I must involve young Tanakha people in the work that I do, and I need to passing on those skills is part of my job. That's part of the reason why, in this case, the Tanakha Nation chose to hire and retain myself and folks from Reciprocity or my previous company, Firelight Group, to actually support them. It's part of the arrangement. It's part of the deal. If you want to do good work outside of the university, and I spent a number of years working with a large environmental firm that worked directly for big companies. I don't think I did bad work at that period of time, but there was no reason for the communities that I worked with to trust the work I was doing. They know where my paycheck is coming from. That's why, for me professionally, it was really important to move to a different business model where I only work direct. I want the communities I work with to be my boss. They're the ones telling me what I need to be able to be doing, and the kinds of tasks that are useful to them. Sometimes I'm not good at those tasks, and I need to say there's somebody else you're going to need to talk to on this. Other times, as an anthropologist, I can provide some useful tools, hopefully. And that's, to me, that's a really critical thing about working outside of the university, working, where the rubber hits the road, in a reconciliation type context, is who is your boss? Who are you taking your marching orders from?
Mhm.
So.
If I could just add on to that, also a little back and forth, that is really important. So when it says what questions will we be thinking about, one question is, how do we create space for Indigenous anthropologists? But also, how do we create space for their culture?
Hmm.
That's something really important because we deal with timelines a lot. A lot of our funding, comes with timelines. And it can be really hard to, within a community, to get people on board within those timelines. And it's not that the communities want to be slow. Often it's vital and very time sensitive that they get this done. Um, However, sometimes it takes longer than what is required. And so it's really easy to get caught up in red tape, caught up in bureaucracy, caught up in timelines, funding, things that need to be done, and having a goal in mind. But it's extremely important. And what I really enjoy about anthropology and the anthropologists that I've worked with is they understand, a lot of them understand this aspect. If we're working on something, a project, and the goal changes, that's fine. How do we support what they need, not what we need? This is something that's really important. How do you create space instead of saying, I want to, look for this specific answer or reach this specific goal? If the people are saying, we don't want that goal anymore, we are changing, we want this goal now, how are you able to allow that process to change?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it's a critical thing. It happens at the macro level, the big scale of a project. Also happens in the interview room, and it just a plug for good training from the universities, good training from academia. um, Students that I work with who have gone through a program where they've learned different methods, been given a chance to try some out, to fail, to figure out, fumble around. Those are the students who actually have the agility in working with communities to be able to understand when the problem is changing and when you actually need a different method or a different approach to find the solutions that the communities are asking for. The work outside the university is great, but there is absolutely a skill set. There's some fundamental ways of understanding social science and moving through things, understanding legal precedent, finding your way through an approach to that. That anthropologists bring a set of tools that almost nobody else has. So there are some really important things that are there. I do also think we need to also recognize, Natasha as a Tanaha trained anthropologist is bringing things from the Tanaha anthropology to that reconciliatory space, that nobody else could. So it takes all kinds. It makes me think of the Tanaka creation story that all of the different animals all have their different roles, and it takes everybody coming together. So. We're getting towards the end of our panel discussion here, I think. And this last question kind of focused on students. And if students are interested, if others in the room are interested in doing the kind of work that we do, what kind of advice would we have for them? What kind of supports exist already or need to be created? And this is also sort of a call out to, I think, our academic folks that in some cases we need the universities to be doing things that they may not be doing. So why don't we turn to that? And then after that, I think we're opening up to question and answer. I do notice that in the chat, it's got all kinds of great things coming up in it. So we'll turn to that soon.
I'll go first for this. I would like to just speak to any potential Indigenous students, Indigenous anthropology students up and coming or in the webinar right now. The advice that I would have for you is you're allowed to question things. You're allowed to question the way things are being done, and your voice matters. One thing that I learned in university that was huge for me as a student was knowing that my voice mattered as an Indigenous person, coming from a different worldview, coming from a different cultural lens. Ask questions, be vocal, and you belong there. And also, a big piece of advice is to really also focus on your cultural grounding, because it's really easy when there's a discipline that is Western in nature, it's really easy to get caught up in that. So it's really important to maintain like a strong spiritual backbone, like, make sure that you take time to be with community, and you take time to be with your elders, and you take time to bead, and you take time to harvest, and whatever it is that you do that helps you know who you are at your core, do those things during university, because it can be really hard.
That's really excellent advice, Natasha. And I really appreciate everything that you've said about the importance of mentoring and mentorship and training within communities. And I wanted to sort of build on that a little bit, or respond to that too, and just encourage anthropologists who are practicing either both inside and beyond the university to look for and create opportunities for Indigenous students who are interested in anthropology or anthropology adjacent type of work to work in their home communities, so that they don't have to feel like the only place that the knowledge is kept is within universities. And we know universities like UBC and UVic and others and across Canada are making some changes to make more welcoming spaces for Indigenous students, but there needs to be more opportunities to learn and practice this work of interviewing, of mapping, of answering whatever kinds of questions that the communities want to be answered in community and on the land. That to me, the ability of anthropologists to work on the land, on the landscape, and learn from the elders and the knowledge holders about where the story sites and the places where cultural practices happen and that need to be revitalized and known and documented and protected, that there are opportunities for students, young people, to do that on the landscape, and that they don't have to be enrolled in a program of study to learn these things as well. Like Natasha, you were saying, for years you've been an anthropologist and a Ktunaxa anthropologist for over 10 years, not all of them necessarily enrolled in a formal program. But for students to know that, like you said, ask questions and be curious and form relationships and do all of that. And it doesn't necessitate being enrolled in a program or having letters after your name.
Yeah. For me, just in a couple of minutes, I noticed in the chat there's a comment about not parachuting in.
Mm.
I know this was a big concern of mine when I was, I look back on my career now, and there have been a couple of communities that I've worked with once or twice, and they haven't asked me back. But there's other communities that I have, I've worked with since I was 19 in one case, and still going up there. I started out as a long-haired teenager. I'm now a gray-haired or no-haired person up there, and that continuity of relationship, continuing to be asked back, um, is something. It's the opposite of parachuting, but there is a cost. Keeping those relationships takes energy. There's not that many communities you can build those kinds of relationships with and maintain over time. Um, in my experience in my career, you build relationships and connections in places where you can do work that's useful, where people see you as a valuable part of the picture. Um, and to me, that's as students and who are people who are moving forwards, whether you want a university position or to work out beyond the university, that focus on doing work that is useful to the people you work with, it's the opposite of curiosity driven research. It's research that is driven by the direction and the needs of the community. Sometimes those are proactive, and when it's proactive and the community is absolutely defining the whole research agenda, that's amazing. It's extremely rare. It's usually reactive. It's usually the community saying, wow, we've got a great big mine that wants to open up in our backyard. Or we've got this uh, some government piece of legislation that's being they're pushing it down our throats, or some contaminated sites on our lands, our territory that we need cleaned up and cared for, and nobody's listening to us. Those are the things that drive the kinds of work that I do outside of the university. And I, if there was something that I would let students know, don't be afraid, engage, have relationships, become connected. The only way to do is to step into that role. Whether you're an Indigenous anthropologist or a non-Indigenous anthropologist, get connected to communities and listen to them. They are your bosses. Even if you've got a grant that's paying you from somewhere else, consider the communities you work with to be your bosses. Um, and over time, just continue to do useful work. And if you do, there is, I almost wish I could say there's not much work to be done in reconciliation. That would be a wonderful place to be. But it's taken us 150 years to get the incredible mess that we have to, and all of the opportunities, and Canada's a wonderful place and all of these great things, but it's also an incredible colonial mess. There are generations of us, whether Indigenous or non-Indigenous, who will need to be doing this work, and anthropology places you well to be able to do it. As soon as, in my experience, as soon as I've worked myself out of a job and passed the baton on to somebody else, there is another request hot on the heels. And it's challenging, and I need to learn all over again. And, but it's also incredibly rewarding. So there's some words of wisdom, if they can be. Should we turn to the room? I wonder.